The neat thing about breathing is by changing the way in which you breathe, you can actually change how your mind is processing thoughts and feelings and emotions. The average person breathes about 25,000 times a day, and most of us aren't thinking about any of those breaths. We take in 30 pounds of air into our lungs and out of our lungs every single day. So if you think that air and how we take that air in and how we expel it doesn't affect us, it's crazy. So much more than food. And in my opinion, after talking to researchers for so many years, if you're not breathing correctly, you're never ever going to be healthy. And I've seen this repeatedly with people. Once we take control of this unconscious ability to breathe, we can then harness all of the power within that and use it to do some incredible things. Some things that scientists thought were absolutely impossible have been proven to be absolutely possible by focusing on your breathing. If you look around the world, all of these different cultures started studying the same things. They've started coming to the same conclusions about breathing, that if we do it improperly, our health is going to suffer. If we do it properly, we can really help use that to help heal ourselves and to go up that next rung of human potential. Then you have all these other researchers who have studied breathing for 50 years. Some of these researchers studied it for 50 years. They said, how we breathe absolutely affects us. At least the first step about breathing is to be conscious of it and to understand that this isn't something that should just be running in the background, in the back of our minds, but something that we can take control of. This isn't asking people to go out and run 6 miles a day. You can adopt healthy breathing habits no matter what you're doing. If you're sitting in front of a computer, if you're watching Netflix, if you're walking around. And just by adopting those, you can have a transformative effect on your health. That sounds like a huge claim, but I've seen it and the studies have shown it. I remember breathing through my mouth as a kid. I see pictures of myself when I was young and I'm breathing through my mouth. Not all the time, but it definitely happened. Till I met Dr. Nyack down at Stanford, and he said, this isn't normal at all. We should be breathing through our nose all the time, especially during sleeping hours. That's a third of your life. And if you're breathing through the mouth, you're just exposing yourself to everything. And also you're loosening the tissues at the back of your throat and making yourself more apt to snore and have sleep apnea. So, once you realize how dangerous mouth breathing is, you can then take a conscious effort to change it, how you're breathing throughout the day. Right? So once I learned this, I was shutting my mouth all the time, practicing nasal breathing. When you're just looking at the lungs, you're not even looking at the airway. You're not even looking at what's happening in the nose, but this is all one connected system. So what's happening in the nose and in the airway is absolutely going to be affecting what happens in the lungs. And what happens up here affects what happens down here. And so even though we may not be able to take conscious control of our heart rate, of our circulation, of our blood pressure, of our liver function, of our digestion, when we breathe, we can influence all of these functions and willingly help ourselves function in a completely different way that's beneficial to our health. And again, what I think is so interesting about this, it's not just a subjective experience. You can measure the effects of someone just shifting their breathing within a few minutes. I can breathe in a certain way and 2 minutes later take my blood pressure and it will go down 10 to 15 points. You imagine that's after a couple minutes. What's going to happen after a couple days, couple weeks, couple months of adopting healthy breathing habits? Well, we're seeing these people are able to overcome so many chronic problems and really put themselves up that next rung of human potential. The more you breathe and the more often you breathe, you're going to be taking breaths in, but you're going to be exhaling them more quickly. And if you look at the airway, you've got your mouth, you've got your nose, you've got your throat, you've got the bronchi. All of this is dead space. And by that, I mean there is no oxygen that can be absorbed in these areas. Oxygen is absorbed in the lungs. And most oxygen is going to be absorbed in the lower lobes because blood is gravity dependent and there's more blood in the lower lobes of the lungs. So if you're breathing at a rate of 20 breaths a minute at a tidal volume, minute volume of about 6 liters, you are going to take in about 50% of that air is going to make it through the lungs into the bloodstream. Only 50%, because so much of it is here. You only get to use 50% of it. So if you breathe 12 times a minute, you're going to bring that air down a little deeper, okay? And you will be able to use about 70% of that air, which is a huge difference, 20% difference. But if you breathe 6 times a minute at 6 liters, you use about 85% of that air. So you can see how much more efficient it is. And not only is that more efficient for oxygen exchange, you are also allowing your heart not to be overburdened by constantly beating. You are going to decrease your blood pressure. All the systems of the body are going to work in harmony with one another. So you just see, it's a lot of people think, well, I want to breathe more breaths, more air because I'm getting more oxygen. The opposite is happening. By breathing most closely in line with your metabolic needs and slower, you are getting more oxygen and you're able to do so much more with so much less effort, and your body really likes that. Imagine being at a stoplight and just revving your motor, just being in neutral and just zzz. That's going to wear that car down so much more quickly, and it's completely unnecessary. That's what you're doing when you're over breathing. If I'm breathing at 18 breaths per minute, which is considered normal, by the way, 12 to 18 is considered in the normal range. If I'm doing that, I am causing so much unnecessary wear and tear on my heart, on my cardiorespiratory systems, blood pressure, vascular system, your brain. You're stressing yourself out. I mean, I could go on and on. Why not breathe more closely in line with your metabolic needs? And this is not only a benefit for people with asthma and anxiety, this is a huge benefit for athletes. Every time I went to my gym, you'd see people just working out, thinking they're getting more oxygen in by doing that. After a while, you're going to feel your fingers getting a little cold, you're getting a little dizzy to your head. That isn't from an increase of oxygen, it's from a decrease of oxygen to those areas, to vasoconstriction to those areas. So when you're over breathing, you are actually inhibiting circulation throughout areas of your body. So breathing less, you can do so much more. And you can see this by, instead of breathing those 18 times a minute, which is, again, way too much, you can slow down your breathing to about 6 times a minute. And if that's difficult, make it 8 times a minute. No one's watching you. This is not a competition. But by just breathing more slowly and more efficiently, I think you will be amazed how your body's going to heat up. We can so clearly see what happens to the body when we're breathing at this rate and when we're breathing slightly deeper than we're used to. We can see what happens to blood pressure, circulation, and almost most importantly, autonomic nervous system function. If you get a heart rate variability monitor and look at what happens when you're talking or when you're not focusing on your breathing, compared to what happens after just a minute of breathing at a rate of about 6 breaths per minute. You will find these lines that were jagged and disorganized become these beautiful sine waves because your body is entering a state of what researchers call coherence, where all the systems are really working at peak efficiency, which of course, why wouldn't you want to be working at peak efficiency? When you're doing that, you can think better, you will feel better, and your body will be allowed to help heal itself. Dr. Margaret Chesney had worked for decades on National Institutes of Health research, and what she had found was that when we sit down at our desks in the morning, one estimate says that 80% of office workers do this. We open up our email, got Zoom on, got Twitter on. So, oh my God, I have 60 emails. We stop breathing. We just stop breathing, and then we go. So she called it email apnea, because we're so distracted and stressed out by what's going on. If you think about, let's say there's a tiger coming around the corner here of my house. What am I going to do? But we do the same thing unconsciously at work. Even though there's no tiger around, even though there's nothing threatening us, our sense of threat has become so sensitized that so many of us will stop breathing or start breathing completely dysfunctional. And she's found that if you do this for long enough, it can have some of the same effects on us as sleep apnea. By that, I mean neurological disorders, physical problems, again, spiking blood glucose. The neat thing about breathing is by changing the way in which you breathe, you can actually change how your mind is processing thoughts and feelings and emotions. I can actually, not only do I feel better, I can think more clearly. Not a placebo. This is how it works in our bodies, and it's so important to acknowledge this throughout the day. This was all adapted, researchers found, from prayers, from Buddhist prayers, from Kundalini yoga prayers, from Catholic prayers. All of them, this is probably no coincidence. All these different cultures came to the same conclusion that, wow, we feel so much more connected to ourselves, to the universe, to everything. A lot of that had to do, this is what the researchers said, to the respiration rate, to breathing in this certain way to calm your body and make you more receptive to that message. And we know that nasal breathing is going to allow you to perform harder with a lower heart rate. You're going to be getting more oxygen more efficiently by breathing less. And you can see this with professional athletes who have adopted to nasal breathing. Sanya Richards-Ross, the best runner, sprinter for 10 years going. It's fascinating to look at pictures of her in the Olympics. Closed mouth, nasal breathing, all of her competitors beside her, breathing through the mouth. She's in front of the line, winning golds time and time again. And she's just one example of what we've already known for decades. Dr. John Douillard has done tons of science, tons of work in this, looking at cyclists, nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, and looking at their endurance, looking at their performance, and looking at recovery. And it is such a drastic difference between those two. I would say go see for yourself, because you're your best judge of this. If you have a blood pressure monitor, and a lot of people do, take your blood pressure before and after a simple breathing practice 6 times a minute. You could start with that and give it a week. So adopt a simple practice. Again, you can adopt healthy breathing practices anywhere. And we know that there's a solid foundation of science between all of these things. We have seen people absolutely transformed by adopting simple breathing habits. This is not a placebo effect. It's absolutely real. Focusing on your breathing can really have some transformative effects.